Hey, how are you?
So I will do a brief introduction while we let Katelyn catch her breath. So I just introduce myself briefly. I'm Matthew Raskoff. I see some familiar faces here, but some unfamiliar ones, which is a great thing. So thank you all for coming today. This is the first in what I hope will be a series of talks that we do that engage intellectually with some of the work that all of us do, some of us do every day. And I hope we can enrich our daily work with some ideas from some of the smartest people working in education innovation around the world. So today we're welcoming back to Duke, a Duke alumna. As you can see her reconnecting with one of her faculty. So to my right is Katelyn Donnelly. She is a Trinity 2008 alumna. And she is the managing director of the Pearson Affordable Learning Fund and co-founder of that fund, which invests in low-cost, high-quality educational solutions in the developing world. And I think it's an interesting set of challenges. Katelyn was just speaking to my students at UNC, and we were thinking about some of the kind of crossover between what Pearson is learning in working in developing countries and what that means for low-cost education worldwide. I think there's some interesting provocations and interesting questions that arise when you think about what would the application of these ideas mean in the US context. And so I think that'll be one of the challenges that Katelyn leaves us with today. But more broadly, I think of this as sort of first in a sequence of talks that I hope we do, just from really smart, interesting people working in our space. I hope we can bring back some of the folks who have connections to Duke, but also just bring in outsiders who may not have a connection to provoke us and stimulate us and inspire us. So with that, I'll hand it over to Katelyn. I'm going to have to leave a couple of minutes early, and I apologize for that. But Sean Miller, Director of CIT, is going to close us out at the end of the talk. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, and thanks for hosting me back at Duke. I want to say it's just a pleasure to be back here. I graduated in 2008, and my senior thesis advisor, Professor Ed Towers, here, and as I'll talk about my career in the developing world, was really at Duke where I got interested. I remember coming to office hours at my first international development course I took with Professor Tower, and seeing all of his currencies laid out on the wall, and his sword from Sudan, and thinking, how can I have an interesting, impactful career and build on my Duke career? So it's so great to almost be back here full circle.
And then as soon as Katelyn was about to graduate, we had lunch together with my colleague Charlie Becker, who's a Russian specialist, and Katelyn explained how she would take the Trans-Siberian Railway all by herself from China to Europe, and Charlie was really worried about it. But she's here.
It's true. We shared a spirit of adventure in the economics department. So what I hope to do today is just tell you a little bit about private affordable education in the developing world, and our solution to finding for-profit investable opportunities around that marketplace. But I want to start today start this conversation a bit with a discussion of the problem. So I came to this field from the common path of Duke graduates, management consulting, and I'd seen this project on the pipeline that looked a little bit more unique than your average project, and I'd always wanted to go abroad, and I saw this project to work with the government of Pakistan to reform its education system. And so I packed up my bags, I went to Lahore, Pakistan, and I was shocked by what I found. 25 million primary and secondary students in Punjab, 8 million of them are out of school. Of those that are in school, half of them will graduate 5th grade being unable to read and write a single sentence. And when you visit a public school in Punjab, Pakistan, you are greeted with a scene that looks a lot like this. School children very quickly assembled, probably weren't sitting there before they knew we were coming. Obviously not really learning anything, materials totally dated. This says glossary, with a underage student who clearly isn't going to be able to read a word of English. And so this is often the state of education for hundreds of millions of children in the developing world. And what we saw in Pakistan is that it's no different than elsewhere in the world. So, Pakistan has its enrollment challenges, and this is an interesting graph that shows you the percent of primary age children enrolled in school. And so over the last 15 years, with the Millennium Development Goals and the development community, there's been a real active effort to get children in school, and that's mostly succeeded. So students are now in school, but what the challenge is now is people realize they're not learning anything. The scene in the picture that I showed is indicative of what you see across India, Pakistan, Sub-Saharan Africa, etc. Students are in school, but teachers often don't show up. When they do, they're ill-prepared, and they don't follow the curriculum, and what that results in is extremely low levels of any sort of basic attainment. So that means that widespread government failure has popped up as a homegrown solution of private education. You see this huge unmet demand really focused on quality. And so government education hasn't met the needs of students. Emerging market governments spend about $2.2 trillion a year on it. Most of it goes to teacher salaries. 250 million primary school children can't read or write globally. And parents have voted with their feet. They've said, the government's not going to solve our problems, they're not going to move fast enough, we need a solution for our children today. And they've turned in droves to private schools. So if you go to Lahore or Delhi or Lagos, between 60 and 72% of kids are already attending private schools. And most of these to date have been cream mom and pop shops. Their quality is better than the government schools because the proprietors hold the teachers accountable and deliver some basic of curriculum, but they're not that much better. But parents will pay up to 30% of household income to be able to attend these schools. And in emerging markets, the median age of the citizen is very low. So in Nigeria, it's 18 years, in the US, it's 38, and in Japan, it's 58. So I have a short video to show a bit of the mindset of a parent in India when they think about their education options for their kid. Hopefully, this will have loaded and it'll be fine.
But this is a sound investment in his future, in our... I'm worried about my son, Arjun. I want his future to be brighter than mine. The problem is, where can I give him the best education? There's the local government school, which is free, but it has a reputation for not pushing the kids enough, and it still costs money. I want to send Arjun to an elite school, but I could never afford it. There's a new low-cost private school nearby. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but maybe we should try it. Since starting at that school, Arjun has flourished. The teachers are in class every day, and they really engage the students. Arjun's English has improved so quickly. He is using all kinds of technology to do schoolwork. And he even scored much higher on his national math and English exams. It can be a bit of a struggle to make ends meet, but this is a sound investment in his future, in our future.
Helps show a little bit of the parental mindset. So, I saw this pretty clearly in my time working with the government of Pakistan, and when I went to Pearson from McKinsey. So Pearson, if you don't know it, is the world's largest learning company, and I joined Pearson about 5 years ago with a mandate to help them think about how they measure learning outcomes across their suite of products and services. And then also, they were interested at that time of thinking, well, Pearson traditionally has been a US-UK company, is now wants to be a global company. How do we think about providing private sector solutions, for-profit private sector solutions that treat low-income populations as customers, not victims? And so, seeing the dynamics that we saw in the developing world and this rise of private sector for-profit schools, we thought, are there investment opportunities that we can make? Are there entrepreneurs that are thinking not just for one school, but chains of schools, or innovative services that would increase the quality of the schools at scale? So what we saw is that strong entrepreneurs have entered the market, that they've responded to the huge demand from parents and the government failure, and started across Africa, India, Southeast Asia, a whole suite of different companies that are dedicated to schools, learning services, insight services, English language learning, and development. So there are actually viable investment opportunities that are out there. So we designed the Pearson Affordable Learning Fund as a double bottom line fund with a mandate to do two mandates initially. The first was to provide 1 million low-income children with a quality of education while achieving market competitive returns. So in this case, it was for Pearson about 15 to 20% IRR, which is about the same that they expect from any investment that they make in emerging markets. And for quality, we use the same efficacy framework that we developed for Pearson's product and services across the company and apply it to potential portfolio companies. And then, given the huge role of government, and government often being a payer, and with the idea that we really wanted to access low-income communities, we wanted to demonstrate to governments and international donor agencies that the low-cost private education sector can be a solution to their problems and educate the poor in a cost-effective way and be more effective than the traditional methods that were not focused as much on quality. So the core of our investment thesis is embodied in this slide. I won't go into all the details, but when we look for companies across the ecosystem, we look for three big things. We look for companies that have strong local founders and management teams. They have to have an ability to build and scale in challenging environments. We believe that education in these markets is often an implementation issue and about education, not about strategy. So the companies have to have strong layers of management. Second, they need to have strong unit economics and a clear commercial model. So the cash flows need to be there. There needs to be a patient time frame over time. They need to be addressing a large and growing market, so that you know that the investment is viable from a business model point of view. And then we believe that efficacy, or the ability to demonstrate learning outcomes, is at the core of value creation. So if we're going to really be able to take a school model and bring it to scale to compete against the different mom and pop that you see in the market, you have to be able to show that our models are better performing than the existing government schools and better performing than the other low-cost private schools in the market. So, and when we think about that as how it applies to services, we often say that technology, people often think that technology can be the silver bullet in education. If we all, gave students access to iPads or the internet, they'd be able to learn quite a bit of content. And our view is that technology has to be seen as an enabler of learning outcomes, not an end of itself, and that the pedagogy and learning needs to be at the core of the model. So technology, to the extent that it enables that best practice pedagogy or enables better learning and drives efficiencies or scale, is how we think about the effectiveness of technology. And then when we were thinking about building our portfolio, we looked much more at a private equity style model, even though we were doing early stage investments, because we believe that education companies are not you're not going to get a Google of education. Like there are limits to scale of a successful education company, so you need to have those unit economics in mind and then plan for a lower loss ratio and more singles and doubles with solid returns and not any one runaway success. So We started the fund 5 years ago with $15 million of Pearson, of an initial Pearson capital, and have been investing ever since. And I'll get into some of our investments. But I just was going to show, one slide about the way that we think that our focus on efficacy and support drives value creation. So again, what we think differentiates us and our companies in the market is, and this, I've blotted out the numbers, but you can see the valuation increases between the different rounds of investment, is the really the focus on quality. So Avanti is a tutoring, an after-school tutoring platform for students who want to get into the engineering exams in India, and their students outperform the national average 40% to 10% nationally on the main exam. Spark Students is the first blended learning academy in sub-Saharan Africa, and their students perform nearly a grade level above the national average in math and English. And so the long-term benefits for us, as we believe focusing on quality, is that parents are going to flock to quality, so that's going to mean you're going to have increased enrollment and be able to scale your revenue that way. You'll have increased access, which means the more affordable you can make the product, and increase the size of your target market and be able to target across the spectrum. Governments are increasingly looking to do private-public partnerships with private sector providers. They want to work with operators with proven solutions, something that's tried and true, and something that aligns the incentives of the company with their ultimate goal, which is to ensure high-quality education. And we found that when companies put learning outcomes and measurement at the core of their model, that also usually has a strong correlation with operational efficiencies. So that cost discipline will also drive the profitability and scalability of the model. So how's our journey been? So we've now invested in 10 companies that are operating in 7 countries. So Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, India, the Philippines, and Indonesia. We've deployed and committed over $20 million. And 2 years ago, we got an additional commitment of $50 million from Pearson. So Pearson was excited about what we were doing. They saw the real potential in the market, and they said, this is something we want to commit additional capital to. And so the market's grown tremendously, and we now look at over 300 active pipeline opportunities across emerging markets. So what are the sort of models of things that we invest in? So as I had mentioned before, one of the big opportunities that we see in the sector and what our portfolio consists mainly of to date has been what we call direct delivery models. So businesses that are selling learning services directly to students. So they have that one-on-one interaction. And for us, this has been chains of low-cost private schools. So believing that the mom and pop model is what the sector, what the demand of the market's currently created, but that there's a real opportunity for operators that are more efficient in terms of their back office and then are more attuned to quality to be able to scale efficient models. So this basic infrastructure of schooling is still highly in demand, and you can make business models very effective on it. And I'll go into the Omega schools and the Spark schools next to give you a greater sense of what this looks like in practice. We also invest in learning services. So these are businesses that are selling products and services to institutions. So this includes content, curriculum, financing, like debt products, and technology. And so in that fragmented mom and pop market, if you're not going to be building a school chain that's going to compete with that market, another solution is to sell higher quality products and services that are going to allow those operators to raise their quality over time and give their teachers tools that will support a more innovative pedagogy and more support for their teachers. So we've invested in a company called Karate Path, which is an English language learning curriculum that is focused on using a pedagogy that has developed for how students learn mother tongue languages, so much more immersive rather than linearly based like many language learning curriculums. Haruka EDU is an online program management company in Indonesia that partners with universities to take university courses online. And this was our first higher ed investment and our most recent investment. Experience Fund is a company that does low-cost science kits, so very cheap sort of periodic tables or like experiments that students can use to learn science. And then Zaya Labs is a tablet software solution provider. We also see quite a bit of opportunity in the skills category. We haven't made an investment directly in skills yet, and these are businesses that really create the link between education and employability, and they have like a direct link to higher wages. So, to go into a little bit of detail on some of our particular investments and how these investments work, our first investment was Omega Schools in Ghana. So Omega was founded in 2008 by a joint team of a professor named James Tooley, who's sort of the godfather of low-cost education. So he's a professor at the University of Newcastle who's written quite a bit of academic research into the field of low-cost private education and how the poor are educated. And there was a partnership between him and a local Ghanaian entrepreneur named Ken Donko, who actually ran the schools today. And so they had a vision of creating this replicable chain based on what James had seen across other markets. And they innovated on the payment model. So the real innovation around Omega was two things. First was they allowed parents to pay this pay-as-you-go model. So often schools will charge tuition on a term basis or a month-to-month basis, and this school charges an all-inclusive fee of about 75 cents a day, or about 4 Ghanaian cedis to parents. So this allows access to petty traders, local fishermen, people who are earning income on a day-to-day basis and aren't going to have the ability to save up enough capital to make a large school payment for their child at the beginning of the month. Second of all is, instead of using traditional textbooks and having teachers teach from textbooks, they used lesson plans with strong pedagogy, and students each had workbooks so that the teacher would be able to just execute on the lesson plan, and the student would be able to follow along in a workbook that was linked to that lesson plan. So traditionally in a school like this, you probably have a teacher that would open up a textbook and just read from the textbook. That would be sort of the best case scenario. So it was innovating around the teaching and learning model of the school. And Omega students have done pretty well. A couple of years ago, we did a third-party study by Results for Development, and it found that Omega students significantly outperform their government peers in math and English, and they generally, the younger students have outperformed their peers in the private sector, and there's a lack of statistical significance at the later years, but we think that will change over time. And the other schools the other private schools in the area that Omega competes with charge at least double the tuition. So when we first made the investment in Omega, we started with 10 schools outside Accra, and they're now at 38 schools today. And they also have expanded to Liberia, where they work in partnership with the Liberian government to manage 19 schools on behalf of the government there in a private-public partnership model. And then another one of our school models that we made an investment in is the Spark schools. So Spark is the first blended learning primary school chain in Africa, and this means that the students spend about a quarter of their time on Chromebooks doing math and literacy software like adaptive learning. And this then allows the in-class time to be much more effective. Having the teacher group the students into groups, giving them tasks that are appropriate to their learning level that they've been able to get feedback on from the technology, and it allows them to also save costs by having a learning facilitator in the learning lab as opposed to a full-time teacher. And the pedagogy of Spark has really shown out in the performance data, with Spark students learning 1.5 or 2 years worth of material each year and ranking a year ahead of their government peers on national exams. And so when we first made the investment in Spark, they had 131 students and 1 pilot school, and they're now at 11 schools and 4,000 students. And we think that the growth is going to continue pretty swiftly from there. So I thought that it just give you a bit of an overview of the market, the solution that we've built with the Pearson Affordable Learning Fund and some of our portfolio companies. But I'd love to hear from the people in the room, what are the big questions on your mind when you've thought about this presentation and affordable education? And these are some of the questions that people often ask me. So happy to take a stab at some of these questions, but would love to first just open it up and get thoughts, comments, reactions, questions from the group.
Just to clarify, the first example where you were talking about the school, that was in Ghana?
That's right.
You mentioned public-private partnership in Liberia. Do you foresee that approach expanding?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of governments are going. So in Pakistan, when we were working with the government, they had a foundation that also had a voucher scheme program. Every government has a different philosophy and approach to how they want to engage with the private sector. But I think there is an acknowledgement that if people want to address quality faster, they need there's other private sector solutions or ways that they can partner with the private sector. But not every government thinks like that. So Liberia is a bit of a unique test case because as we know, the country was ravaged by Ebola for a year and a half. The schools were completely closed, and so they had almost no infrastructure to reopen. And so when they did, that's when they invited private providers to come and help manage the schools. And that's a unique scheme because the government pays for the teachers, so they're all public sector teachers. The buildings are all run by government, and it has a very strong RCT that they're putting in place to ensure that the providers are bringing quality. So it will, I think what happens in Liberia will definitely be a test case for the rest of the world, and particularly for West Africa. It's still early days. Yeah.
I'm curious, the 3 criteria that you had at the get-go, I'm curious how those criteria have evolved at all, or you guys have found nuances to those from when you guys were first starting that fund, just based on experiences you were having with some of your first investments.
Yeah. So I think that those broad criteria have stayed the same, and the way we think of them is there's kind of a high bar for each, and then within the portfolios, one investment might be more significant, maybe more distinctive on one of those elements than others. I think we've found that when the business model needs to be very clear, because that's really where you get scale. And if you begin to make compromises on the business model, or you get an entrepreneurial team that is maybe just a little too green, then us as fund managers end up spending all of our time with that team and not having as much impact. So I'd say that's where my emphasis has changed. Yes.
So to say where I'm coming from, I have spent a lot of time reporting in Haiti in particular, and that's a place where about 80% of the schools are private and almost uniformly terrible because there's no oversight of the teaching. Most teachers haven't completed a 9th grade level education themselves. So how did you, and I was just doing some very quick Googling about some of the places that you guys invest in, and I'm sure you've read some of these critiques before.
Yeah.
I know nothing about Ghana, so I'm looking forward to you tearing this guy apart. But Christian Adaipoku, he's the president of Ghana's National Association of Graduate Teachers, and he was criticizing this project specifically, talking about the problem with investment and the privatization of the education system. He said private schools extort the poor In Ghana, even a small amount every day is a lot of money. He was saying that 75 cents a day may seem low, but represents 25% of the annual household income of the average family in Ghana and 40% for the poorest. So my question is, first of all, what you say in response to that, and second of all, how you determine that investment in the private sector is the best way to go rather than directing money toward ministries of education in these various countries so they can build up their own school system.
So that's a great question, and I do get it a lot. And I guess the question is, I mean, do you think parents should have choice? No one's forcing a parent to pay 75 cents a day. In fact, like what the CEO of Omega would say, he's like, is we have to earn that 75 cents every single day. Because, you know, we have enrollment numbers, but actually the biggest number for us from a revenue point of view is attendance. So if the parents aren't happy with what they're getting and they can't pay the 75 cents or they don't think that's good value, then their kid's not gonna show up that day. And they can walk across the street and go to the public school. That's totally their prerogative. So what I say to that is we're giving an option that there's clearly demand for. And if there wasn't demand for it, then we would be out of business. And I think there is a lot of work to be done in the regulatory regime to have output-based regulation of private schools so there's more transparency in the market and parents are empowered with data. We've tried, that's why we have an emphasis on efficacy and measurement ourselves, because we want to be sort of good corporate citizens and good governance and give that to governments or give that to parents. Not every actor or investor is like that, and so there definitely can be those sorts of problems. And I mean, to your second question of, well, why are we investing in private education? Why not give it to the ministries? Well, a couple things. First of all, is $7 billion a year in aid money already goes into the education sector, and that money goes straight into government coffers. And we have not seen the ROI in terms of learning gains from that money. So we've invested over a 5-year period $20 million. It's a drop in the bucket. It's an experiment. It might not work. We're not saying we're solving every problem. We're not a replacement for government that still exists. We're not a replacement for aid to governments. But we think we're a pioneer in a field that is trying to provide an alternative solution.
And you evaluate on the basis, you only talked about national exams. Is that the only way that you determine whether the kids are learning in the schools?
So they also have beginning of term and end of term exams for each of the subjects where you're able to measure progression over time. And the national exams are just like a way to kind of like standardize across a local context to know how you're performing. They're not always like the best. You sort of have to triangulate.
Now, is this bond financing or stock financing?
It's all equity. Our investments are all equity, but when they get, I think you can introduce debt when you get to a more stable state.
And so Pearson presumably also publishes these materials and sells the materials to these companies as well.
It doesn't actually. I mean, that's one of the things that that I think is an interesting challenge to Pearson is its costs are too high to do that in a way that is sustainable. So one of the things, I think someone asked me what's changed in the investment criteria is we're like, oh, how do you create these partnerships between Pearson and the portfolio companies so we can share learning? And we try to create relationships between different business units where we're like, okay, no one on either side is mandated to enter into a transaction, but they could if they lined up. And what happened is it was never a big enough opportunity for a Pearson business team to pursue. And so that's, for me, one of the learnings is you have to have homegrown ecosystems because otherwise, it's going to take a long time for any sort of big traditional player to think that it's an opportunity worth investing capital in. Yeah.
First, I want to frame this in that I like money. I like being able to buy things. But you mentioned that your schools are sort of moving into the market space of these mom and pop shops that are doing a better job than the government ones, and presumably owned, funded, run by, staffed by people from those countries.
Yeah.
Whereas at the end of the day, you're going to be hopefully making some sort of profit. And that's money that sounds like it's coming from relatively poor people within the countries leaving the country instead of staying within the country through these mom and pop shops. So is that necessarily a good thing overall for the country?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I mean, so we only invest in companies that are local to that country. So the entrepreneurs like Ken Donko in South Africa is Ghanaian, the entire management team is Ghanaian, they're from that community. The company is registered locally, it pays taxes locally. And so it's very much like a homegrown company. If Pearson were going to sell its stake, you know, depending on who it would sell, you know, then that value would appreciate and that would go to the fund. But that was always Pearson Capital to begin with.
Okay.
So that's the way we thought about how we were empowering local entrepreneurs rather than.
So you're not making any money off of them?
Well, you make money like when what we did is bought, you know, a slice of the equity from Omega at like a $5 million valuation. And if Omega were to sell at like a $10 million valuation, then our stake would have doubled and we would be able to get the gain of that capital. But we don't like, we're not getting a dividend from the students every month, if that makes sense. Like that's all goes back to the company and is mostly used to like expand for growth. And the South African schools are led by South African entrepreneurs. The Philippine schools are led by Filipinos. Our belief is that education is a nation-building activity, and so that's why we have that philosophy. And our ideal is to actually invest in those sorts of mom and pop. Like often with the school chains, you find, I mean, yeah, you don't want to like glamorize it too much. So some school chain operators really do have this vision for quality, and they care a lot about the students. But there's a lot out there, especially in India, that this is just like the best business opportunity they can find. They're like, there's high demand, parents will pay, I know how to set up this business. And so they're in fact are like less governed, like less accountable, etc. And if we found, you know, the right entrepreneur that was local, we'd invest in them. If they could scale their model, we would definitely invest in them. Or we considered an investment, and this investment's done really well. Unfortunately, we didn't make it because Pearson considered it a financing company. But there's a company in India that makes small loans to these sorts of schools that allow them to invest in like new types of curriculum or like expanding the size of the school. And so that allows them like access to a debt product that they wouldn't have otherwise. And the interest rate is partially determined by their learning outcomes. So they get a better rate if they do just get through better.
Who determines the curriculum of the schools, and does Pearson have any influence over that?
Yeah, so the curriculum all has to follow the national standards in the countries that we operate in, and the local team, the management teams of the companies are ultimately in control of the curriculum. We've often worked with them to try and introduce things into the curriculum that are more like life skill oriented. So like making it more about like projects and make like project based or like posing questions to drive critical thinking skills, while the traditional curriculum is very much like structured as a rote learning curriculum. So that's the type of way we've helped, but it's always been sort of in partnership with the management team and the local curriculum team.
A third kind of model that I have heard about, and I'm curious if you have heard about efforts along this lines, is to do a kind of teach the teachers kind of a thing. So with the idea that you get a multiplication of benefit if you help skill up those teachers and then send them out to teach better in schools. Have you heard anything along those lines, or is there been any investigation or something like that?
Well, that's generally how everyone does like teacher training, is like trying to constantly like teach the teacher and then have them like learn from each other. So the way I think all the schools actually do this is like generally there's like a academic lead. So in the case of Omega, it's called like the academic cluster manager, and they'll say have 5 schools that are in their cluster, and every day, let's say they'll go to a different school every day, and they'll sit in on teacher and kind of coach them on how they could improve or like what they're missing. And also it's like it's not an accountability mechanism in terms of people are held to account, but it is a way of ensuring that there's another touch point to make sure that people are doing, are on task and are teaching well. And all of our school chains have some sort of model. And then a couple of investments that have been looking at are actually like teacher training companies, because that is like the big gap in the market, even in the public sector teachers as well, is like how do you improve the quality of teaching. And I mean, what I've seen is like you have to like the structure of the school has to support the teacher to improve their curriculum. So it's hard to do teacher training in a vacuum.
Yeah, I was wondering if there have been any sticky ethical choices you've had to make or investments you've turned down because of ethical situations that you walk into?
Yeah. I haven't had any, like there was like one entrepreneur that we had gotten approval to invest in, and then it turned out like the enrollment numbers weren't as rosy as he told us they were. And like, if there's an integrity issue, this is an investment we'd walk away from.
I guess I was thinking, like, what if the national curriculum says that a particular population is of lesser status or something, and if you're matching people only to the national standards, then you are funding people to teach things that we would consider incorrect.
Yeah, we haven't had that.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, some of the stuff is pretty basic. I mean, we take have sort of this Western view of like good education, good behavior management. I mean, I once toured an Omega school, and you're like, oh, what do you like most about your school? And the kid's like, they don't cane me here. Well, I'm glad we're not caning Omega schools. Like, it's good. But when you're out in some of these areas, like there always are like things that like, and you're dealing with teachers and students, like there are always things that come up, and for us it's like having good values at the center of the school, so you deal with them like quickly and fairly.
Can you speak a little bit more to the role of technology in these schools? And I wonder if you see in the future that technology may begin to have more of a role, and things like libraries of educational materials might become available that you could then scale to a larger group. And also maybe you could talk about how affordable technology is in these schools.
Yeah.
What kinds of things you have out there, examples.
Yeah. So each use of technology is a bit different across. So I'm just thinking the three big school models we have are Omega in South Africa, Spark in South Africa, Omega in Ghana, and these schools in the Philippines. The technology in Ghana that we've tried is the teachers all have essentially tablets. So the lesson plans come to them on a daily basis, and they use the lesson plan that comes on their tablet or cell phone, and then they read from that. Then the school manager also has a tablet, and when the students come in on a daily basis, they take attendance and like mark the books and report that all back to head office. So they're kind of like accountability mechanisms. And then we've tried to do electronic payments, but at least in Ghana, and this isn't even that far outside of Accra, like connectivity is a real problem. So we haven't been able to get the reliability of connectivity high enough to be able to do electronic payments for the students yet. And because the materials you can download ahead of time. I mean, each Omega school does have a computer lab, so the students they do have like an ICT class every week. I would say it's a bit basic, and I wish they had access to more. I mean, we have, each school has a library that has books in it at Omega, and I wish those books were used more. Like, I think there's so many, so I think that there is a real opportunity to have access to much more digital content and curriculum. But sometimes I also see like people not using as effectively like the materials that we have. we have made an investment in a company called Zaya in India that is a software content and like question answering solution on a tablet for a very low cost. But the technology is still sort of not cheap enough to scale broad enough. And then in South Africa, which is a more affluent country, and the price point is 5 times higher than it is in Ghana, the students have the Chromebooks and the learning labs that they're able to do modules on. And those are they're able to be much more internet enabled in that sense. So I think the way, if I were going to summarize, we see the role of technology is it can help with scale and efficiency right now, and then to the extent that it can support teachers in delivering lessons, that's where we've seen the best use of it, at least in a K-12 space.
Yeah. Thank you for your talk. It's great to learn about what you've been up to and what the fund does. One of the arguments that I hear often that in favor of this kind of private school choice that you're talking about is that the competition will lead the public sector to adopt better practices and will stimulate some sort of competitive catch-up there. Is there any evidence that you've seen that that is the case in any of the places that you have worked directly or worked with some of these companies?
We've seen a bit of that anecdotally in Ghana. Like, we installed whiteboards in all the classrooms, and then like a couple weeks later in the government schools we saw like they installed whiteboards as well. So sometimes it can be kind of cosmetic. I think that the more sophisticated conversations though happen at like the senior ministry level when they think about how do they engage with the private sector, and think that the private sector can help them be a solution to their challenges. And that's why with all of our companies, we've made it really clear, and this has been their messaging as well, is to not act as an adversary to government. So the narrative is not to like make government look bad, but to see how we can help them. So like if they want to franchise their materials, or like often public sector teachers will attend like teacher training over the summer with like Omega teachers or with Spark teachers. So we try and look for those sorts of opportunities.
Are the materials that are developed in these schools that you invest in, are they made available to the government schools?
They could use them, I mean, if they wanted to. Spark, it hasn't like institutionalized it. Like I would say that most of them are not yet like packaged enough for them to be able to really do that effectively. So that hasn't happened, but it could in the future, especially if we did more product development.
Duke in the global health space has had some role in connecting entrepreneurs from different countries to each other so that they can learn about the models that are working. And it seems like individually some of your countries are showing success, but what does Pearson do to bring them together so that they can think about sharing those models across multinational settings?
Yeah, so we are a co-founder and co-sponsor of something called the Global Schools Forum with, so it's us, Omidyar Network, ARC Schools, which is the largest chain of charters in the UK, and then the UBS Foundation. And we just held our second annual gathering of the Global Schools Forum. So we brought together 25 chains from around the world that serve lower income populations. And these were private, they're all private school chains, but some were nonprofit, some are for-profit. Our three portfolio companies came, and it's an annual gathering where they share best practices and learnings, and also are able to mix with investors and funders to be able to get like further financing options potentially. And we hope that that forum can help drive an improvement in quality. So we want to see if we can get all 24 of those chains to adopt like similar methods of measuring learning outcomes. And then also a common narrative about what the sector represents, signing up to like a joint ethical code, and be a sort of conduit for ways that the government could potentially interact with the private sector.
You talked a couple times about ROI, but I'm not clear what return you're measuring and how you're measuring.
In terms of our financial returns.
Is that what you mean?
Well, from a fund point of view, that's the ultimate metric that we're measured on.
Because you were saying that like the reason to invest in public-private partnerships rather than funding education ministries is that there's a higher ROI.
Mm-hmm.
But of course there wouldn't be an ROI for you if you gave money to a government because you wouldn't get any money back.
So in that context, what I meant is the government, like so you take in Pakistan, the voucher was like 300 rupees, and the voucher for a private school would be about 300 rupees, and the cost to educate a student in the public sector is like 600 rupees. And then the kids tend to perform twice as, like, at a higher, much higher level in the private sector, and so you get a higher return on your, like the government gets a higher return by having that voucher. It's a higher return on learning.
Okay, so and this is measured by?
Well, if you take the, like, I mean, it's for a third of the cost, you're getting a higher learning outcome.
Okay, as measured by standardized testing.
Yeah, and that's the government's own scheme. And then, yeah. So, and you can take that similar metric and apply it to our schools as well. You know, the data in these countries is really hard to get and make consistent, and we often, I mean, when we are able to measure our students against government schools, especially when it's about, when they're like sample surveys as opposed to national assessments, I think we're just really lucky that the government actually like lets us have a research team that like goes in and does that. So we don't generally publish that around because you don't want to embarrass the government.
Do you get a sense of what the impact of your intervention is on the school system as a whole, including government schools and private schools that you're not investing in?
I think that's hard to measure. And I think that it helps change the dialogue. The truth is like the scale at which we're operating is still really small. So I think we show a light of what a partnership could be like. So in Ghana, for example, MEGA's been operating since 2008. We have 38 schools now in Ghana. The government has they've just elected a new president, and he's interested in doing potentially a public-private partnership in government. And we're now at a place where we could potentially like work and like devote enough resources to participate in that partnership. And then you measure it over a long term. But I mean, I think you really have to have a basis of like trust and collaboration, because it is long term. There's going to be a lot of bumps, and there are a lot of there are just a lot of unexpected things that can come up. And I think it's tough to measure success after like 1 year or 2 years. Like you really have to look like 5 or 10 years down the line. And you also hopefully are like iterating along the way. So it'll never be a perfect measurement, because you obviously want the schools to be getting better over time.
We're actually running out of time. So I want to thank Katelyn for her talk, and if you all have questions, you may have a few minutes before we have to move on, but thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you.